Hey guys! Tonight we drift back, way back, to a city floating on a lake. Where morning mist curls like smoke over silent water. And garden plots stretch outward in delicate symmetry. You're standing at the edge of Tenochtitlan, the heart of the Aztec Empire. It's early. The sun hasn't quite made up its mind. A faint rustle of reeds. The distant clack of a paddleboat. And the gentle chirp of a bird that absolutely knows it's too early to be this enthusiastic. You shift your feet and feel damp soil beneath your sandals. A farmer passes you with a bundle of maize stalks balanced across his back. Nods. You nod. Neither of you says a word. Because somehow even the air here feels sacred. Tenochtitlan, built on Lake Texcoco, is a city of marvels. But you're not here for pyramids or sacrifices or warriors with obsidian clubs. No. You're here for gardens. Quiet, rectangular, hypnotically symmetrical gardens that whisper. You probably won't survive this empire. But at least you'll die surrounded by fragrant beans. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what you do here. And hey, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin by stepping onto a causeway. On either side, still water reflects the soft, shifting colors of dawn. Ahead lies a garden, but not one you know. These are chinampas. They're often called floating gardens. But you'll quickly learn they don't float. They rest on a scaffold of woven reeds, sunk into the lake bed and reinforced with layers of mud, compost, and whatever the neighbor's turkey didn't eat. Rows upon rows of rectangular garden plots drift toward the horizon. Each plot is surrounded by narrow canals just wide enough for a canoe. And the whole scene is oddly geometric, like someone got carried away with a ruler made of sunlight. As you ride slowly in a canoe, don't worry. You're not paddling. Notice how straight the edges are. How each chinampa is bordered by willows. The trees aren't random, they're part of the design. Their roots keep the banks from eroding. And their branches provide a gentle shade that rustles in the breeze like a lullaby. Here's a quirky fact, some chinampas had nicknames. Gardeners would name their favorite plots, usually after birds, gods, or a particularly productive squash. One man called his, the stubborn pumpkin. It produced exactly one pumpkin every year. But it was the size of a toddler and twice as temperamental. You trail your fingers in the water and feel the temperature change. It's cool, clean, even though this city houses tens of thousands of people. That's thanks to an engineering system so complex. Modern scholars still argue whether it was centrally managed or the work of thousands of independent hands. A gardener squats at the edge of a chinampa, pressing his palm into the mud like he's greeting it. He doesn't rush. He checks for signs, the way the maize lands, the scent of the soil, the tilt of a flower petal. Aztec gardening wasn't just agriculture, it was part prayer, part science, and part extremely patient staring. You pass another plot where a boy no older than 10 gently rakes mulch around a squash bean. His father watches, saying nothing. There's a rhythm to the work, like the plants expect you to move a certain way. Too fast, and they sulk. Too slow, and they grow bored. Historians still debate whether chinampas originated solely with the Aztecs or were adapted from earlier Mesoamerican societies. It's possible these tranquil spaces were the result of centuries of accumulated muddy trial and error, literally. Either way, by the time the Aztecs got hold of the idea, they made it theirs, and then perfected it. You notice something strange? No fences. These gardens are open to the sky and each other, separated only by canals and low vegetation. Privacy isn't the point, harmony is. Each chinampa fits within the greater design like a tile in a mosaic. The sun peeks over the horizon now, casting long golden lines across the water. Birds awaken. One flaps past your head with the elegance of a laundry sheet in the wind. You reach a central dock where gardeners gather. Some trade gossip, others silently sharpen wooden tools. Someone offers you a warm tamal wrapped in maize husk. You accept. It smells faintly of chili and earth. It's mildly delicious. Or maybe just comforting, like something your dream self might eat before a nap. If you look carefully, you'll see the city itself rising in the background. Temples and palaces shimmer in the distance. But here on the water, things are quiet. You're far from the hustle of markets and priests and military drills. Here, In this orderly expanse of mud and plants and mirrored sky, the Aztecs built something rare: peace. You stretch, you breathe. You're starting to understand why someone might name their favorite patch of beans after a god. Or why they might to a cactus just to see if it flowers faster. There's a moment when everything goes still: no birds, no voices, no wind, just you, the scent of lake water, and a garden that refuses to float, but still seems to rise. You're gliding now. The canoe rocks gently as you drift deeper into the patchwork of green and gold. It smells of wet leaves and warm mud. And something else, maybe the faint sweetness of blooming marigolds. This is where the magic of the so-called floating gardens really begins to reveal itself. But let's clear something up right now: these gardens, they don't float. Yes, they're called chinampas. And yes, it looks like they're floating serenely on the surface of the lake. But no, these are very much anchored. In fact, they are among the most stable things in the Aztec world. Which is really saying something for a city that was basically dropped in the middle of a lake. Here's how it works. Picture a giant underwater lasagna. But instead of noodles and ricotta, it's made of woven reed mats. Thick layers of sediment, lake muck, and decayed vegetation. Aztec farmers, ever persistent, would shovel long wooden poles, called ahuejotes, into the shallow lake bed to create a perimeter. These poles were then filled in with plant matter, earth, more plant matter, and finally a thick layer of fertile topsoil. The result? A chinampa that doesn't float, but behaves like it does. The reed mats at the base help trap moisture and nutrients. They also prevent erosion and allow roots to grow through and anchor the garden even deeper into the lake bed. The whole system is, if we're being honest, suspiciously clever. Like, too clever. You begin to wonder if ancient Aztec gardeners had a secret council of grandmothers who passed down the wisdom of lake lasagna building with solemn nods and ominous clay pots. But it gets better. These gardens weren't just stuck out in the lake at random. They were placed in tidy rows. Almost like crop spreadsheets. The canals between them, called acequias, were used not only for irrigation, but for transport, canoes carrying farmers, baskets of maize, bundles of medicinal herbs, even the occasional chicken that refused to be normal and had to be gently relocated. At the corners of each chinampa, willow trees were planted, and no, not just because they looked pretty, though they do look very pretty. All droopy and poetic, willows have long, thirsty roots that help draw up excess moisture, and their branches provided a little shade and a whole lot of structural integrity. They're like the garden's own security guards, gentle, leafy, and probably judging your mulching technique. You pass a smaller chinampa now, probably used for specialty crops. Historians believe these plots were used to grow more delicate or high-value plants like chili peppers, tomatoes, or amaranth. Occasionally, these special plots were devoted entirely to flowers. Because yes, even in an empire built on conquest and cosmic beauty, someone had the idea to build a floating flower shop. And thank goodness, one tiny chinampa you glide past as a curious feature, a small shrine made of stones, nestled beneath a pepper plant, no bigger than a shoebox. It's dedicated to Tlaloc, the rain god, offerings of maize, petals, and once, allegedly, a very shiny fish, are left here during the dry season. Scholars still argue whether these shrines were personal devotionals or mini community altars. Either way, the garden wasn't just where things grew, it was where people talked to their gods. Now let's get a bit fringe for a second. Some modern researchers believe the layout of the chinampa system might have been loosely modeled on Aztec cosmology, specifically the idea of four cardinal directions converging in a central axis. In other words, even the mud farms were designed with cosmic harmony in mind. You're starting to notice it now, aren't you? The symmetry, the rectangular plots, the evenly spaced trees, the crisscross of canals all aligned with unnerving precision. You squint. Did someone use a compass on this tomato field? Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe it's just that Aztec eyes were trained from childhood to find comfort in structure. But here's the kicker: despite all this sophistication, the tools were refreshingly simple. No bronze plows, no oxen, no bossing machinery, just hands, wooden paddles, stone knives, and probably an entire generation of strong backs and sore knees. Back to your boat, you're rounding a bend now. And ahead, a gardener is methodically pressing seeds into the earth with a pointed stick. This tool is called a koa. Just a sharpened wooden staff. often curved or split at the end, used for planting, digging, and sometimes, if the day's gone badly, dramatic singing. He wears a simple cotton tunic, and his feet are caked in dark silt. He hums a tune, off-key but comforting, and flicks a pebble away like it insulted his grandmother. You imagine he's been here since dawn. Maybe before. These chinampas require care, not the frantic kind, the slow, repetitive kind that lulls you into a different rhythm. A quieter one. It doesn't look up as your canoe passes. But you can feel it, the sense that you're watching something old. Older than the pyramids. Older than breakfast tacos. A human being planting food in a square of soil suspended in water. Aligned to the stars. Held up by roots and tradition. You close your eyes for a moment. The boat rocks softly beneath you. The scent of wet earth hangs thick in the air. Somewhere behind you, a dog sneezes. The gardener presses another seed into the mud. The chinampa holds steady. You drift on. The morning deepens as the sun stretches higher above Lake Texcoco. The light shifts from gold to a pale, sleepy yellow, casting long shadows that fall precisely along the edges of each chinampa like the day itself respects symmetry. You continue gliding through this dreamlike aquatic grid. And slowly, you begin to notice something strange. Everything here, every plot, every path, every canal, is organized. Meticulously so. The Aztecs didn't just build gardens. They built ordered spaces, each one echoing a deeper, sometimes spiritual logic. Their love of symmetry wasn't a design choice, it was a worldview. Aztec cosmology divided the world into neat quadrants. Like an ancient, very serious pie chart. At the center sat Tenochtitlan, the sacred hub of their universe. Radiating outward were the four cardinal directions, each associated with a color, a god, and a bundle of deeply symbolic metaphors you're definitely not awake enough to process right now. But here's the thing, those same quadrants. You can see them reflected in the layout of the gardens. The long, narrow chinampas run in straight lines that stretch out from central points, often mirroring the broader urban plan of the empire itself. Historians still debate whether this level of order was intentional design or simply a happy coincidence of available space and good irrigation. But here, it feels too perfect to be random. You begin to notice little human things hidden in all this neatness. Some gardeners have placed colored stones at the corners of their plots. Red, blue, green, even obsidian black. Are they symbols? Just aesthetic preferences? Nobody agrees. But they catch your eye, breaking up the uniformity with personal touches. Like a rebellious houseplant that refuses to match the room. You pass one chinampa bordered entirely by marigolds. Thick, golden clusters line its edges, forming a brilliant yellow frame that gleams in the sun like it's trying to outshine the lake itself. Marigolds were sacred flowers in Aztec culture, associated with death, rebirth, and the kind of rituals where people stare very seriously at incense smoke. They weren't just decoration, they were spiritual beacons. And yet, here they are, casually thriving along a pepper patch. It's that blend of the sacred and the everyday that defines Aztec garden aesthetics. A vine trellis might double as a ritual space. A squash blossom could become an offering. A symmetrical plot wasn't just tidy, it was a miniature world. Balanced between chaos and cosmos. One gardener, you can just make her out, moves through her chinampa like she's painting. Each motion has purpose. She's repositioning a set of stepping stones to form a precise arc between two rows of maize. You stare at it for a moment. Then realize it forms a near-perfect curve that mirrors the arc of the sun above her head. Coincidence? Maybe. But probably not. Aztecs were obsessed with balance. Not only in nature, but in human life. To them, disorder wasn't just messy, it was dangerous. Symmetry, on the other hand, was divine. It represented harmony between gods, humans, and the land. So the more symmetrical your garden, the more you were aligning with the cosmic order. Of course, not every plot was perfection. Some had lopsided tomato plants. Others had paths that zigzagged like someone got distracted halfway through building them. One plot has what appears to be a completely rogue sunflower. Taller than a man and clearly doing its own thing. And that's okay, even in the Aztec Empire. There's always one sunflower who didn't get the memo. You float past a series of plots now, each belonging to a different family. Their proximity reflects not just practicality, but social hierarchy. Some families with higher status, especially those tied to priests or warriors, had larger, more decorative chinampas. These featured small altars, stone-lined edges, and, occasionally, a little bench carved from volcanic rock where one might contemplate the mysteries of beans. There's a lovely scholarly debate about whether these status-based differences were formalized or simply emerged over time through generational effort. Did high-ranking families receive better land? Or did they just have the resources to maintain more impressive chinampas? No one quite agrees, which is perfect bedtime material. Now, don't let the idea of status gardens fool you. Even humble farmers took pride in making their plots beautiful. You pass one where red amaranth sways between rows of maize like a ruby-colored curtain. Another as carefully aligned chili bushes. So evenly spaced it looks like they were laid out by a very serious god with a ruler. Everywhere, there is intention. Even the pathways between plots are sometimes lined with smooth stones, forming little footpaths that guide bare feet between walls of green. They make a gentle clicking sound under your canoe, like the garden is welcoming you. Stone by stone, you notice the color green is never just green. It ranges from the dark, almost black leaves of the beans to the soft, blue-tinted grass used to line the plot edges. It's like someone found 20 different ways to say, peaceful, and planted them all side by side. And there's a quiet here, interrupted only by the splash of a heron landing. Or the sudden giggle of children you can't quite see. The symmetry has a calming effect. Your shoulders drop. Your breath slows. You begin to understand how a place can be both functional and philosophical. Even the gods, it seems, approved. The garden, to the Aztec, was not just a food source. It was a moral compass. A mirror of the universe. A place where you could arrange a few square meters of earth and say, here, this is how things should be. So you keep floating, surrounded by tiny worlds made of maize and marigold, each one singing its quiet, symmetrical song. You drift beneath a willow whose branches trail the water like fingers. Brushing against your canoe, the sunlight dances through them in soft flickers, like a lullaby made of light. One last thought flutters through your mind before you blink slow and long, in a city of warriors, markets, and gods. It was the gardeners, calm, silent, muddy-footed gardeners, who preserved the very shape of the cosmos. You're getting used to the pace now. The garden doesn't rush you. In fact, it seems to slow time down just a little. The water laps gently at the side of your canoe. And the breeze, scented with lake mist and sweet maize pollen, feels like the world exhaling slowly. Somewhere nearby, someone is singing, not loudly, just a low, rhythmic melody, like a lullaby made for the plants. You follow the sound and find yourself watching a gardener begin the day's work. He is barefoot, shirtless, with a white hat made from woven reeds shading his face, and kneels at the edge of the chinampa. His hands deep in mud that oozes between his fingers like chocolate cake batter. This is where things become wonderfully mundane. The glamour of symmetry gives way to the slow, repetitive motions of real life. You're witnessing the daily routines of an Aztec gardener. And, spoiler alert, it's more meditative than action-packed. It starts by inspecting the soil. Not with fancy instruments, but with hands and nose. Aztec gardeners were soil whisperers. They could tell from the scent if a patch was too acidic, too dry, or just right. One sniff, and they knew whether to add more decomposed lake gunk or start over. Imagine if modern jobs worked that way. Your boss just sniffs the carpet and nods sagely. Next comes weeding, and moves down the row, plucking out unwanted intruders with quiet precision. There's no shouting, no hurry. It's a kind of silent negotiation between man and land. You grow. But only here. Aztec gardeners didn't use pesticides. Instead, they relied on observation. If one plot had more bugs than usual, they'd plant companion herbs like epazote or mint to confuse the pests. Or they'd call in reinforcements. Certain birds were encouraged to live near the gardens, specifically because they snacked on unwanted insects. And let's be honest, nothing says natural pest control like a hummingbird with a vendetta. It pauses to adjust a reed mat that's come loose from the edge. The mat prevents erosion and helps guide water where it's needed. With a few swift, practiced movements, it's tied down again. You can almost hear the plot breathe a little easier. Then comes watering, not with buckets, but with a clever trick. The gardener uses a curved gourd to scoop water from the canal and gently pour it at the roots. No splashing, no flooding, just quiet ladles of lake water. Like tucking a child in for a nap. The Aztecs understood that plants responded to tenderness. Or at least they acted like they did. Some sources claim that farmers would sing to certain plants, especially those used in rituals. Not because it helped them grow, but because it was respectful. This was a culture where maize was a deity, not just a side dish. So yes, whispering to your corn was completely normal. Encouraged, even. The gardener now unrolls a small bundle made of cloth. Inside, seeds. Not just any seeds, but those saved from the previous season, the best of the best. Tear kept dry, wrapped in woven pouches and marked with tiny symbols. Maybe a song for maize. A flame for chili. A little fish for watercress. Scholars still argue whether these symbols were purely practical or part of a deeper ritual logic. Kneels again, pressing each seed into the soil using a coa. That digging stick again, just a stick. Really, but angled perfectly to split the soil without disturbing the delicate underground network of roots and microorganisms. A dragonfly zips past your ear like a tiny helicopter. It hovers near a squash blossom, then darts away. Insects are everywhere, but they aren't pests, not here. Dear neighbors, partners, background extras in the most peaceful farming scene you've ever watched. Two boys paddle past in a canoe, carrying what looks like a pile of mud. Except it's not just mud. It's chinampas, lakebed muck rich in organic material, used to fertilize the chinampas. The boys deposit the load onto a plot, spreading it by hand with delightfully unnecessary enthusiasm. The gardener smiles and waves at them, then turns his attention to the maize. These stalks are young, no more than a few weeks old. But they already stand tall and proud. Their leaves rustling like they've just heard a good secret. Bends down, whispers something, you can't hear what, and gently props up a sagging stalk with a small stone. There's something deeply calming about watching someone care this much for a single plant. In a world where empires rise and fall, someone has decided that this stalk matters. That's the kind of energy we need more of. Some chinampas were even shared. Extended families would work a large plot together, each person responsible for a different crop or task. One might handle squash, another beans, someone else the morning watering. If you were particularly good at growing peppers, you might be that pepper guy for generations. Imagine passing down not a sword or title, but a perfect chili growing technique. Kind of beautiful, really. There's a curious tidbit too, certain plants were grown purely for their looks. These weren't decorative gardens exactly, but aesthetics still mattered. A patch of colorful flowers at the corner of your chinampa wasn't just indulgence, it was a way to honor the gods, your ancestors, and maybe impress the neighbor whose sunflowers kept flopping over. And here's your quirky moment, some gardeners painted tiny faces on gourds as a kind of joke. Just simple lines, a mouth, maybe a nose. These silly squash heads would sit among the plants like quiet guardians. Harmless pranks in a world of ritual and routine. Because even in an empire obsessed with balance, someone always has time to draw a goofy face on a vegetable. The sun climbs a bit higher. Shadows shrink. The gardener straightens, stretches his back, and squints at the plot. It looks right. Everything in its place. Plants aligned, soil damp, edges tidy. Steps into his canoe and drifts off to the next plot. The water ripples behind him like a signature. You lean back in your boat. You've just witnessed something slow, soft, and deeply human. No drama, no urgency, just a man, a stick, and a garden that listens. Your canoe glides lazily onward, past rows of chinampas basking in the sun like well-behaved guests at a lakeside picnic. The air now carries the faintest trace of something earthy and sharp. You wrinkle your nose and inhale again. Is that cactus fruit, or something more herbal? The answer floats into view in the form of a small, scrappy plot growing what can only be described as the Aztec version of your grandmother's experimental herb bed. This is where things get a little weird, in a good way. You're about to meet the underdogs of the Aztec agricultural world. Not maize, not squash, not beans, but the side characters. The peculiar plants, the hairs, roots, and vines that didn't make it into history books but definitely made it into tea. Start with the big three: maize, beans, and squash, known as the Three Sisters, in many Mesoamerican cultures. Tear the beeps. Maize gives structure, beans add nitrogen to the soil, and squash spreads wide leaves to block weeds. It's the original girl group of farming, flawless in harmony. Deeply codependent, But now, zoom in, really look at the edges of the plot. That bitter-smelling flower, probably Sempoalxochitl, the marigold, medicinal, symbolic, kind of cursed in the wrong hands. And that patch of spiky, slightly smog-looking greenery? That might be epazote, used to flavor beans and prevent the consequences of too many beans. A humble hero, really. Now take a sharp right and meet Tlilxochitl, the wild orchid that gave the word vanilla. That's right, vanilla is native to Mesoamerica. And the Aztecs were among the first to cultivate it. They didn't bake cookies with it, though, they used it in sacred drinks. Sometimes mixed with cacao, chili, and other heart-palpitating ingredients. It was rich, rare, and possibly not bedtime friendly. You float past another chinampa where a woman carefully tends to what looks like a stretch of grass. But it's not grass, it's amaranth. A protein-rich grain that's been cultivated for thousands of years. Amaranth was both sacred and slightly rebellious. At one point during Spanish colonization, it was banned because it was too closely tied to non-Christian rituals. Imagine being so powerful as a grain that a colonial empire says, "You know what? No. And over there, that suspiciously leafy bush with the dull yellow flowers? That's hierba santa, a spicy, aromatic herb often used in tamales and stews. Some say it has medicinal properties. Others say it tastes like pepperoni and should come with a warning label." Scholars still argue whether certain varieties were purely culinary or part of ritual preparations. Now for a true oddity, the chia plant. Yep, same chia as in chia seeds. The Aztecs used these tiny seeds as both food and fuel. Mixed with water, they became a sort of ancient energy hell. Runners and messengers would consume chia before setting out. Which makes sense when you consider that some of them literally sprinted across mountain ranges to deliver messages. And then there are the decorative plants with secret identities. Take now what named flowers like Xochitl, often used in ceremonies and funerals. Some believe certain varieties had mild psychoactive effects when burnt, though the evidence is murky. Historians remain divided, some claim spiritual significance. Others think someone just inhaled too much pollen and saw a jaguar playing a flute. Let's not forget nopal, the prickly pear cactus. Equal parts food, medicine, and metaphor. You can eat the pads, harvest the fruit, and apply the juice to wounds or sunburn. Nopal was the aloe vera of its time, except with more attitude and the ability to stab you. You pass a plot where three women sit cross-legged, grinding something with a metate, a flat stone mortar. The air smells sharp and citrusy. You squint. Could be achiote, the seed that gives food that deep red color. Could also be tepozan, an herb used for treating fevers and maybe low moods. No one writes about Aztec antidepressants. But you have to imagine that living in a city on water came with some seasonal blues. There's even evidence that certain plants were grown specifically to be burnt. Not for cooking, but for rituals. The smoke, it was believed, carried prayers skyward. One such plant, copal, still used in modern ceremonies, was considered sacred incense. Burning it produced a thick, sweet smoke that clung to robes and hair and the inside of your nose like holy perfume. You pass a plot where the smell is less than holy. That, friend, is probably Yasosochit, a kind of flower with a smell best described as aggressively natural. Some claimed it repelled evil spirits. Others probably just wanted to repel everything. Some chinampas also included plants not for eating or ritual, but for dye. Aztecs had a rich textile culture, and their bright clothing wasn't accidental. Natural dyes came from flowers like cochineal, though that was a trick. Cochineal red comes from crochet insects that live on cactus paths. Bright, brilliant red from bug juice. You're welcome. It's fascinating how much diversity these plots held. Each chinampa could support dozens of species, carefully layered and rotated to keep the soil fertile. There were no monocrops here. Just a living quilt of colors, textures, and smells. And don't think the Aztecs were planting randomly. Each plant had its season, its moon phase, even its directional association. Some plants belonged to the east, others to the north. This wasn't gardening. It was choreography. Cosmic choreography with a surprisingly high bean count. As your canoe drifts along, you notice one plot with a series of tiny wooden markers. Not for measurement, but memory. Each stick represents a plant that was tried and filed. Aztec gardeners kept track of what didn't grow. Not as shame, but as part of the learning. You think of modern gardeners with Excel spreadsheets and sigh. Nothing is new. You breathe in deeply. Somewhere between squash blossom and pepper leaf. Your head starts to feel heavy. It's the kind of garden that doesn't just feed you, it slows you down. Reorganizes your heartbeat. You reach the end of the row. And the gardener waves from her plot. Her hands are stained green. Her smile is quiet. The canoe turns gently, and the wind carries away the scent of 100 unlikely plants, all doing exactly what they were meant to do. You lean into the movement of the canoe now, swaying softly with the rhythm of the lake as if your body started syncing with the water itself. The morning deepens, a soft blend of wind, insect chatter, and an occasional splash that may or may not be a fish. Or a very enthusiastic frog. As your boat pulls alongside a fresh row of chinampas. Something on the bank catches your eye, a collection of tools resting neatly on a folded cloth. Tear-worn smooth from use. The kind of simple implements that never go out of style because they never had a style. Just function. Aztec gardening tools were surprisingly humble. No wheels, no iron, just wood, stone, bone, and muscle. And yet, they were profoundly efficient, especially in hands that knew what they were doing. Let's start with the koa. Yes, we've met it before, a pointed digging stick, but you're now watching one in full majestic action. A woman bends low over her maize plants, using a koa to erect the soil with minimal disruption. The tip looks dull, but somehow it pierces the earth cleanly, letting in water under like she's conducting a soil symphony. Nearby, an older man scrapes the edge of his plot with a broad-bladed hoe carved from volcanic rock. This one's called a tlachinoyi. Its edge is not razor-sharp, but in practiced hands, it glides through soil and weeds with a kind of sleepy authority, like it knows exactly what not to cut. The blades are lashed onto handles with woven plant fibers, sometimes agave. Sometimes tree bark, because nothing here is disposable. When a handle breaks, it's patched. When a stone blade dulls, it's sharpened. When a fiber fries, well, someone's teenage nephew gets handed a lesson in humility and weaving. Then there's the humble pizzot, a small clay or gourd container used to sprinkle water at the base of delicate plants. It delivers just enough moisture, without disrupting the soil. Watching it in action feels like watching someone pour tea for their ancestors, slow, careful, reverent. Now for a truly niche implement, the tepontli. A flat stone used to crush leaves or soft hairs into salves or poultices. You watch as a healer, clearly not your average gardener, gathers marigold petals, crushes them with the tepontli, and mixes them with sap from a nearby tree. She smears the mixture on her forearm where a mosquito clearly had grand ambitions. Instant relief. Smells like lemon and magic. Children also had tools, tiny versions of the real ones, handed down like wooden heirlooms. You spot a boy using what might be the smallest koa in history to dig a hole for a chili seed. His focus is intense, his fingers muddy, his future very spicy. It's worth noting, there was no metal here. The Aztecs didn't smelt iron. And they didn't need to. Stone and wood did the job just fine. Obsidian, for instance, was sharper than steel, capable of slicing through plant stems, cloth, or even ceremonial animal hides with the finesse of a sushi chef on a good day. Historians still argue whether the lack of metal tools was a limitation or a deliberate choice tied to environmental adaptation. Either way, what the Aztecs achieved with wood and stone would make most modern gardeners politely excuse themselves and cry into their ergonomic wheelbarrows. A man nearby bends low with a long reed in hand. It's not a tool, exactly, it's a guide. He lies it along the rows of his chinampa to ensure even spacing. Not for show, not for status, just because the gods like things tidy. As you float further, you notice one gardener has attached a thin shell to the end of his digging stick. Not decorative, it whistles when he moves it a certain way. Possibly to scare birds. Possibly just to entertain his dog, who is watching from a shady patch of beans and looking deeply unimpressed. Now here's a strange little item, a woven wrist wrap. Not for sweat, but for carrying small tools, seeds, or hairs. Imagine a gardening utility bracelet, but 100% biodegradable and very likely invented by someone who once forgot their seeds and had to row home for them. Twice. Some tools weren't handheld at all. You pass a white basin carved from pumice stone, used to mix water and crushed minerals into a kind of plant tonic. It's thick and gray, like herbal pudding. The gardener dips her fingers in and gently paints the mixture onto the base of a plant stalk, muttering something under her breath. Maybe a blessing. Maybe a complaint about yesterday's storm. Hard to tell with gardeners. You come upon a chinampa that's being rebuilt. A team of people, 3 men, 2 women, are driving long wooden poles into the lake bed with rhythmic thuds. These are tlatzapotzontle, posts made from trees like willow or ahuehuete. Sunk deep into the muck to ensure the new platform. Watching it is hypnotic. The splash, the heave, the shove, like some ancient, muddy waltz. The mud they pile into the new plot is gathered by canoe from a shallower part of the lake, a sludge so rich in nutrients that modern agronomists study it with both admiration and envy. The Aztecs were essentially composting before composting became a lifestyle. And you'll love this, some of the planting lines weren't carved with sticks at all. They were marked by dragging woven mats with attached stones, primitive but effective, garden rakes, that left neat furrows. Ready for planting. Low tech, yes. Effective enough to feed an empire? Absolutely. You pass one last plot before the curve of the canal turns. The gardener here is elderly. Her hair is bound in a cloth. Her feet deep in the mud. She holds her tools not like weapons, but like friends. Her digging stick rests beside her. Her water gourd sits in the shade. Her plants are growing straight and strong, swaying gently in the wind like children who know they are loved. The boat slows. You close your eyes for a moment. The sounds of gentle scraping, scooping, digging, the sigh of the breeze through maize leaves. The knowledge that all of these tools, these plots, this silent choreography, was passed down for centuries without manuals or blueprints. Just practice, just patience, and probably a few stern lectures from someone's great-grandmother. The sun has climbed a little higher now, softening from golden to warm white. But the lake air keeps things gentle. You lean back in your canoe. The wooden sides cracking softly as you pass between chinampas still shimmering with morning dew. And then you hear it, faint fluttering, like paper in a breeze. Followed by a bright, darting streak of color. A hummingbird. Tiny, fast, slightly rude in its confidence. It sips from flower to flower with the urgency of someone trying to taste everything on a buffet before the lights go out. But it's not alone. Aztec gardens weren't just full of plants, they were alive with creatures. Feathered, buzzing, slithering, and hopping. These chinampas weren't just farms. They were ecosystems. Let's start with birds, since the hummingbird has already made such a dramatic entrance. The Aztecs revered birds, especially the hummingbird, which was associated with Huitzilopochtli, the god of war. Strange, right? A tiny bird, sacred to a war god. But it made sense to them, after all. Hummingbirds are fierce, territorial, and fueled entirely by nectar and rage. You spot one now perching on a maize stalk. Chest puffed, wings buzzing like a tiny engine. In this quiet garden world, it's the rowdiest thing around. Historians believe gardeners may have even planted certain flowers specifically to attract hummingbirds, not just for their beauty, but for their symbolic and pest-controlling powers. Next come the bees, but not the kind you're thinking of. The Aztecs cultivated stingless bees, known as melipona. Their honey was thinner, sweeter, and considered medicinal. Stingless bees often nested in hollow logs or clay tubes placed strategically near chinampas. You pass one now, half buried in the shade, buzzing faintly. It looks unremarkable. Inside, liquid gold. The honey wasn't just for food. It was used in rituals, healing, and possibly even as a preservative. Aztec doctors might mix honey with crushed hairs to treat wounds or throat ailments. Imagine your sore throat soothed by bees that didn't even sting. Your modern cough syrup suddenly feels underwhelming. Butterflies drift by, orange and black, utterly unbothered by your presence. The monarch, native to these lands, was a symbol of transformation and the soul. There's a story, still whispered in modern traditions, that the souls of the dead return as butterflies. So in a chinampa, where food, prayer, and memory all take root together, their fluttering presence feels less like coincidence and more like reunion. But not all garden visitors were so poetic. Some were practical. Dogs and small birds like finches were regulars. Some were encouraged because they ate pests. Others, not so much. A whole family of gardeners might build small reed barriers to keep certain birds from eating their seedlings. These weren't scarecrows exactly, more like passive-aggressive reed fences that whispered, "We know you're cute, but please don't." Occasionally, a larger guest might appear. From time to time, lizards would sun themselves on the chinampa banks, small, harmless reptiles who became unofficial mascots. Some gardeners even named them. There's a story, likely half-truth, of a gardener who trained his lizard to eat ants of the squash vines. He called it Chico, which may or may not have translated to crunchy helper. And then there were frogs. Tiny, green, everywhere, chirping at dawn, hopping between rows. Their presence was considered good luck. Their song, a sure sign the soil was moist. The balance healthy. You listen now. And sure enough, the occasional croak rises from the reeds. Maybe they're complaining. Maybe they're gossiping. It's hard to tell with frogs. Here's a delightful twist. Some chinampas were home to semi-domesticated animals, especially axolotls. Yes, the wide-eyed, permanently smiling amphibians that have become internet legends were native to Lake Xochimilco, part of the larger lake system around Tenochtitlan. They were harvested for food. Yes, but also observed, admired, and even mythologized. One legend claimed the axolot was a god who didn't want to be sacrificed. So it turned into a water creature to hide forever. Can't blame him. As your boat glides past one particularly shaded patch, you spot a movement just under the water's surface. A turtle, maybe, or a fish. The Aztecs didn't see water creatures as separate from land creatures, they were all part of the same spiritual web. That's why chinampas weren't fenced off. The goal wasn't to keep nature out. It was to invite it in. Gardens were often designed with this balance in mind. Certain plots had raised corners to catch bird droppings, natural fertilizer. Thank you very much. Others included flat stones where lizards could bask and, allegedly, keep an eye out for beetles. That's right, biological pest control. Ancient style. Still, not every visitor was welcome. The Aztecs had their fair share of garden pests. Grasshoppers, weevils, leaf cutters. But instead of dosing everything in something toxic, they used traps, ash rings, sticky sap, or even crushed chili water, spicy and uninviting for insects. Oddly tasty to humans. Sometimes, when the pest pressure got high, gardeners would rotate crops or even flood a chinampa temporarily to drown out the invaders. You could think of it as a reset button. Aztec style. Flood, rest, plant again. The garden always returns. And it wasn't just animals and insects. Even the wind was part of the story. The Aztecs believed in Ecat, the wind god, whose presence could help pollinate or devastate depending on his mood. Some gardeners hung small reed mobiles or shells from trees, not just for sound, but as gentle offerings, like wind chimes with a side of diplomacy. One curious fringe belief: some gardeners swore that certain plants only bloomed when sung to by women. Whether it was myth, superstition, or a clever trick to get husbands to shut up and let their wives garden in peace, no one's quite sure. But you pass a chinampa now where a group of women sings softly while tending vines. And you can't help but notice how well those vines are growing. As the boat rounds another turn, a heron takes flight. Its wings slice the air in slow, deliberate beats, and for a moment, the entire lake seems to hold its breath. Then it's gone. Just ripples and reeds, dancing in its wake. The creatures of the garden return to their quiet choreography. Bees hum, frogs chirp, a lizard blinks once, twice, and settles back on its rock like it never even noticed you. And maybe it didn't, because here, among the plants and animals, you're not a tourist, you're just another part of the garden. Another gentle presence drifting through a system older than memory. As the shadows begin to shift and the sun leans further into its journey overhead, your canoe floats into a particularly wide stretch of water, where the chinampas seem almost to form a spiral. It's subtle, but you notice it. The canals aren't just practical irrigation lines. They're intentional, curving gently in places, forming delicate patterns that reveal something deeper. You're entering the world of Aztec water engineering, a realm of sluices, channels, aqueducts, and incredibly strategic mode. And yes, all of this was designed without metal tools, computer models, or survey drones. Just a deep understanding of lakes, gravity, and probably a whole lot of trial and error involving so-called tunics. The first thing to understand is that Tenochtitlan sat in the middle of a lake that wasn't exactly a crystal-clear alpine paradise. Lake Texcoco was brackish, part freshwater, part salt. So, the Aztecs had to get creative. Very creative. The canals that crisscrossed the chinampa fields weren't just for transportation. They were the lifeblood of the gardens, bringing in fresh water, flushing out waste, and providing a gentle, steady irrigation that didn't drown the roots. You glide past a narrow sluice gate now, just two upright stones with a flat board slidey between them. Primitive. Maybe. Functional. Absolutely. Lift the board, and water flows in. Slide it back, and the water slows to a trickle. The entire system is controlled with nothing but wood, stone, and timing. You spot a gardener standing ankle deep in the canal, using a woven basket to scoop up lake silt. He flings it over the edge of the chinampa like he's seasoning a giant salad. This isn't random. The silt is nutrient-rich, deposited in thin layers by the constant flow of water. It's the slow-motion miracle that keeps the gardens fertile year after year. And then you notice something even more impressive, a subtle drop in elevation from one row of chinampas to another. The water flows gently downhill, drawn by gravity in a way that seems almost too perfect to be accidental. Scholars have debated whether this was a result of long-term observation or deliberate grading of the lake bed. Either way, the effect is effortless, like the gardens are watering themselves while everyone else naps. You round a bend and come face to face with a low stone bridge, barely wide enough for a single canoe. A boy stands on it, lowering a clay jar into the canal on a rope. He's gathering water not to drink, but to splash over the hot stones lining the chinampa path. This cools the walkways and helps keep roots hydrated. It also makes everything smell faintly of wet earth and sun-warmed stone, which should absolutely be a candle scent. Further down, you see a more elaborate setup, a wooden flume, built from hollowed logs and lashed together with fibers. It arches from one chinampa to another, carrying water over a gap like a miniature aqueduct. You pause beneath it, watching the slow, clear stream arc overhead. A heron watches you from the bank like you've just wandered into its reading nook. The Aztecs even had methods for separating fresh water from salt. They built dikes, long embankments of stone and mud that divided the lake into zones. On one side, freshwater flowed in from springs and rivers. On the other, the brackish water sat quietly, used for other purposes like salt harvesting or, depending on whom you ask, ritual purification. You'll be happy to know your canoe is strictly on the fresh side. One particular dike, called the Albarradón de Nezahualcóyotl, was a massive engineering feat, nearly 12 kilometers long. It kept salty water from seeping into the chinampa zone. Built with stakes, woven reed mats, and tons of lake bed mud. It was patrolled and maintained like a city wall, because it was that important. A flood could destroy an entire year's crop. This dike was the silent bodyguard of the empire's food supply. Now for a bit of folklore, some say the Aztecs learned their watercraft from watching birds, how herons wade, how ducks build nests just above the high water line. Whether true or not, the connection between wildlife and water design seems fitting when you're surrounded by reeds and the distant splash of a turtle belly flopping with no regrets. You drift past a family using long poles to steer the water in the canal, gently agitating it to prevent algae from choking the flow. The poles are marked with notches, measuring tools, showing depth, clarity, and changes in sediment. It's both science and habit, passed down not in textbooks, but in rhythm and repetition. At one bend, you watch two gardeners sealing a break in the canal wall using a paste made of clay, crushed reeds, and something that smells suspiciously like fermented fish. It's unpleasant, sure, but waterproof. And when your whole life depends on keeping water where it belongs, you'll tolerate a little stink. And here's a lovely little detail, some chinampas had tiny islands in their canals, no bigger than a picnic blanket. These were intentionally left wild. No crops, no tools, no humans, just reeds, birds, and silence. Historians aren't sure if these were ecological sanctuaries, places for prayer, or simply nature's way of reminding gardeners who really own the lake. Either way, they add a peaceful irregularity to the otherwise geometric sprawl. As you pass one such island, the reeds part briefly to reveal a cluster of baby ducklings waddling after their mother. They disappear into the grass without fanfare. No drama. Just another part of the circuit. Another tiny life upheld by an ancient design of water, mud, and movement. It's worth remembering that none of this was built for show. No gold statues, no marble fountains, just a quiet system that made it possible for thousands of people to eat, pray, sing, and survive in the middle of a lake. And it still works, even now, in fragments near modern Mexico City. The canals of Xochimilco whisper the same watery rhythm. You lie back in your boat. Eyes half closed. The canal rocks you gently. Somewhere above, water trickles through a flume, keeping time with the breeze. The system moves on, undisturbed by centuries. And you, just for now, belong to it. The garden ahead looks different. It's not bigger or greener or flashier, if anything. It's quieter, more still, as your canoe glides toward it. Something shifts. The air feels ceremonial, not in the loud, trumpet blaring sense. No, this is the kind of stillness that asks you to take off your shoes, if you're wearing any, and listen. This, you soon realize, is no ordinary chinampa. This is a sacred garden. A place where rows of corn align not just with the sun, but with the gods, where beans spiral upward beside carved stones, and flowers open their petals to more than just the light. You've reached the intersection of farming and faith. You see it in the layout. Perfect symmetry, not for show, but for significance. This garden is a ritual map. A microcosm. It may be small, but it echoes the structure of the universe as the Aztecs saw it, four cardinal directions meeting in a sacred center. That center, by the way, is a mound of maize ringed by marigolds. Their golden petals ruffled like tiny suns. In the middle of the mound is a flat stone with scorch marks. A small offering platform. It's not fancy, just soot, flower petals, and bits of dried hairs. But it holds weight. This was common practice. Some chinampas doubled as teocalli, sacred spaces where people left offerings of food, flowers, incense, or even feathers. You wouldn't think of corn as something spiritual. But in Aztec culture, maize wasn't just food, it was origin. The gods, they believed, formed humans from maize dough. Which means, in a very literal way, you are what you eat. You pause as a woman kneels beside the mound, arranging an offering of squash blossoms and chili. She places each item gently, as if waking someone. Then she sprinkles a fine dust over the display, ground copal. The sacred tree resin burned for its fragrant smoke. She lights it, and a pale plume rises, curling upward in lacy spirals. You watch it twist into the air. Carrying, what? Prayers, gratitude, a whispered complaint about aphids? The lines between agriculture and religion were not blurry for the Aztecs, they didn't exist at all. Farming was ritual. Planting a seed wasn't just about food. It was a sacred act. A tiny reenactment of creation. That digging stick, a staff of divine intention. That water ladle, a vessel of balance. There's a quiet, hypnotic rhythm to the work. The woman hums softly, something repetitive and bowl-heavy. A blessing, a melody passed down like a family recipe? Historians still argue whether these chants were formalized rituals or just deeply ingrained habit. Either way, they linger long after the last note fades. You drift past a chinampa where four trees, each one placed at a corner, stand watch like guardians. This arrangement wasn't accidental. The four trees represent the four directions, anchoring the garden to the world's invisible grid. In the center, a square of tlilxochitl, vanilla orchid, its vines looping around a carved stone shaped like a spiral. Another sacred symbol, another quiet altar. Some chinampas were dedicated entirely to ritual plants. Marigolds for funerals, white lilies for purity, morning glory vines for, well, scholars aren't quite sure, but some think they were used in ceremonies for divination. Their seeds contain psychoactive compounds, and there are accounts of their use in sacred rituals to contact the divine. Not your typical gardening club activity, but deeply rooted in the Aztec spiritual worldview. You pass a chinampa where two men are quietly reciting something, repeating a set of phrases as they sow seeds into a freshly turned row. Each seed is placed with care, followed by a short pause. Then another word. This isn't just about good harvest. It's about alignment, intention, rhythm. Even the act of watering took on ceremonial meaning. Water was the domain of Tlaloc, the rain god, who, by all accounts, had a bit of a temper. You had to approach irrigation with respect. Some gardeners would whisper to the water before letting it touch the soil, as if asking for permission. There's a funny, fringe story that floats around. One elder gardener insisted on wearing a special sash every time he watered his chinampa. Not because it was fancy, no. Because he believed it reminded Tlaloc that the water was being used with gratitude. Was it superstition? Was it fashion? Historians remain delightfully unsure. And then there were garden spaces that were meant to mirror temples, tiny, quiet echoes of the grand ceremonial centers of Tenochtitlan. These weren't for public ceremony. They were for personal reflection. A carved stone here, a reed mat there, a place where the gardener could sit, smell the flowers, and feel, just for a moment, that they were in the center of the universe. You're starting to see the pattern, aren't you? Every leaf, every petal, every alignment of plot to song wasn't accidental. It was an act of devotion. And symmetry, well, that was the pure St offering. A garden perfectly balanced in rows, in elements, in seasons, was not just beautiful, it was blessed. You pass a chinampa where someone has laid 4 stones in a cross at the center of a bean plot. Not large, not ceremonial, just there, quiet, watchful. You feel it more than you see it, that sense of being part of something enormous. And yet deeply personal, like the garden knows you're here. And here's one more curious bit. Some chinampas were said to at night. Whether it was the wind in the reeds, or frogs, or something stranger, people believed that sacred gardens spoke after dark. Some said it was the gods whispering. Others claimed it was the plants releasing the day's memories. You're tempted to come back after sunset and listen. Just to see. You leave the sacred garden slowly. Not because you have to, but because they feel like the kind of place you exit with care. You take a last breath, catching the faintest trace of incense and flower pollen. And as the canoe turns back into a regular stretch of chinampas, you realize that for the Aztecs, the spiritual world wasn't something you visited. It was something you grew. The wind shifts again, just slightly, enough to carry a new blend of fragrances across the water. You sit up a little. Not from urgency but from the soft pull of curiosity. What is that smell? It's not the earthy musk of wet soil, or the sharp green of bean vines. It's sweeter, warmer. You drift toward it, nose first, until your canoe nudges the edge of a chinampa where a small stand of flowering plants sways lazily in the breeze. This is your introduction to the subtle, enchanting world of Aztec garden aromatics, perfumes, pollens, and plants cultivated not for food or ritual, but for feeling. The Aztecs were master perfumers, and much of their aromatic culture started right here in the gardens. While the city around them buzzed with politics, warriors, and ceremony, these chinampas grew the ingredients that defined how a person smelled, which, in Aztec society, was just as important as how they dressed or spoke. One of the most valued aromatic plants was xochicopal, a flower-scented resin. It's harvested from trees that grew along chinampa edges, often scraped gently in long, slow motions so the tree wouldn't be harmed. The resin would harden into glossy, translucent chunks, then be burnt as incense or powdered into perfumes. You see a gardener now kneeling beside a low bush, collecting just a few drops of it, dabbing it carefully into a gourd container. Then there's xochitl, the white flower, a highly fragrant bloom used to scent both clothes and rooms. Aztecs didn't just burn these petals. Sometimes, they crushed them into water to make delicate floral rinses. Walk into a noble's home, and you'd probably be met by a breeze scented with flowers, wood smoke, and just a hint of something spicy, maybe xochitl, vanilla orchid. One of the most luxurious scent notes of the day. You pass another chinampa where strips of bark are drying on a rack in the sun. That's canelat, Mexican cinnamon. Not the exact species you might sprinkle on oatmeal, but a similar aromatic bark that was steeped into teas, used in ceremonial washes, and added to perfume blends. Think of it as the base note in an olfactory symphony, grounding, warm, a little bit magical. Of course, not all garden smells were perfume-worthy. Some hairs were pungent, strong, borderline aggressive, like epazote, sharp, funky, and unapologetically medicinal, or yolosochit, which depending on the season could smell sweet or like a horse's regret. And yet, each one had its place. Even the not-so-pleasant plants were grown intentionally, because the Aztecs didn't divide the world into pretty and useful. It was all part of the whole. You watch a young girl at the edge of her family's plot grinding flower petals with water in a stone bowl. She added a pinch of something reddish, perhaps an natto seed, and gives it a stir with her finger. The mixture turns a soft rose color. She dips a cloth into it, then rinses it out. Her mother will use this scented cloth to clean her arms before a festival. No harsh soaps, just flowers and patience. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Nobles sometimes scented their breath. That's right, after meals or before speaking publicly. Teach you leaves like lily or sip infusions of minty herbs. Fresh bread wasn't just courteous, it was considered a sign of moral clarity. Halitosis, on the other hand, could be a social red flag. So yes, even back then, someone was worrying about their after cornbread. As your boat slows again, a warm breeze wafts over you, carrying the scent of burning copal. It's thick, almost sticky in the nose, but not unpleasant, like cedar, but dreamer. You look to the bank and see a tiny altar, a few petals, a clay bowl with embers, and a single maize cob wrapped in leaves. It's an offering, simple and fragrant. The smoke curls upward in lacy ribbons, twisting like questions the wind might answer. The Aztecs believed that smell was a bridge between people, between places, between worlds. Scents could honor the gods, comfort the sick, prepare a warrior, or calm a child. A home without fragrance was a home out of balance. And the gardens? They were where those bridges began. There's a fringe theory, whispered more than written, that some chinampas were planted specifically for their scent profiles. Gardeners would arrange plants not by sunlight or soil preference, but by how their combined aromas would behave in the breeze. Like composing a fragrance symphony that played whenever the wind moved just right. Imagine walking through rows of sharp mint, mellow marigold, sweet lily, and smoky resin, all arranged to activate one after the other. Not bad for a bunch of plants with no Wi-Fi. You drift past one of these alleged perfume gardens, now. At least, it smells like it could be one. The breeze shifts every few seconds, bringing wave after wave of different floral notes. First sweet, then sharp, then citrusy. It's hypnotic. The kind of smell that makes your eyelids droop even as your nose leans forward. Another small canoe floats by, carrying bundles of flowering hairs tied in tight clusters, likely bound for the market. These fragrant bouquets weren't just for rituals or nobles. They were everyday items, hung in homes, carried during processions, even tucked under pillows, to encourage sweet dreams or ward off unpleasant spirits. Think of it as ancient aromatherapy, only with better storytelling. You remember now the stone bench you passed an hour ago, near the sacred garden. Carved along the base was a phrase, barely visible in the morning light, Xochitito Cayot, the flower is the word. In Aztec philosophy, flowers weren't just decorations, they were poetry made real, symbols of transience, beauty, truth. To grow them was to participate in something beyond survival, something expressive, emotional, even divine. The breeze carries one last puff of perfume past your face. Sweet, spicy, ancient. And somewhere behind the rows of beans and squash, a gardener turns a leaf gently in her hand, not to check for pests, but simply to breathe in the smell of something growing. And smile. You drift now into a quieter stretch of the canal. The gardens around you are still bursting with green. But there's less movement, fewer tools clinking, fewer canoes drifting by. Instead, you hear something else, soft voices, calm, steady tones, the occasional laugh, the sound of learning. You've arrived at a different kind of chinampa, one that isn't just for planting, but for teaching. Aztec society didn't divide education from daily life. Learning happened everywhere, especially in gardens. And why not? The chinampa was the perfect classroom. It was orderly, living, full of cycles and consequences. You couldn't sit among these plants without learning something, whether you meant to or not. Ahead, under the shade of a fig tree, an older man sits cross-legged. A circle of children gathered around him. No chalkboard, no scrolls, just a shallow bowl of seeds in his lap. He lifts one seed, holds it to the light, and says something that makes the children lean in. A pause, then a question, then a ripple of laughter. You don't know the words, but the tone is unmistakable. Storytelling. Aztec elders often passed on knowledge through parables, short, vivid stories tied to the natural world. A maize stalk that grew too fast and fell. A bird that ignored the garden and lost its voice. Morals weren't shouted, they were planted, like seeds. One boy gestures toward a weed. The elder nods, waves him forward. The boy kneels, plucks it with care, and holds it up. A short explanation follows, what it is, what it isn't, and why the gods don't like it crowding out the squash. This is botany, ethics, and community all rolled into one. You pass another plot, where two older girls are helping their younger siblings tie bean vines. There's no scolding, no lectures, just guidance. A gentle hand on the elbow. A whispered correction. A chance to try again. Historians still debate how formal this kind of education was. Was it part of a temple system? A family duty? Or just something everyone absorbed by being around chinampas from birth? Most agree it was all of the above. These floating gardens were more than farms. They were training grounds for citizens, priests, midwives, and poets alike. And yes, poets. The Aztecs had a deep reverence for language. And many of their most treasured metaphors came from the garden. To grow well was to live well. To be a flower was to be beautiful, brief, and true. If you were compared to a perfectly ripened fruit, you were probably having a very good day. One small group of children is gathered around a gardener who's drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick. You watch as the lines form into diagrams, not of plants, but of time. The Aztecs tracked days and seasons using a complex calendar system. And the planting cycles were tightly interwoven with celestial events. A child points at one symbol, a circle inside a square, and a SK something. The gardener nods, and with a firm but gentle hand, draws the symbol again, slower this time. It's both astronomy and agriculture, math and meaning. You imagine the child dreaming later of star plants and moonflowers. And sometimes, the chinampa was a courtroom. You spot a man sitting stiffly on a mat, facing a woman who's gesturing toward a cluster of crochet plants. A third figure, older, more composed, sits between them, listening. This isn't a fight, it's a settlement. Maybe someone's goat wandered onto a plot. Maybe someone borrowed a tool and forgot to return it. In any case, it's being handled here, where the problem happened, in full view of the squash. You see, the chinampa wasn't just a field, it was a social space. Neighbors worked side by side. Disputes happened, of course, but they were often resolved with the land as witness. What better place to settle a conflict than where everyone grows their food, shares their water, and tries not to trample each other's amaranth? Here's a quirky tidbit: some gardeners used specific plants as subtle messages. If you planted yellow marigolds near someone's walkway, it was a sign of admiration. Red chili bushes? A polite warning to keep a distance. And if someone started growing nothing but mint near your edge, you might want to ask what they were trying to cleanse: your presence or their patience. Back in the classroom, one child is now carefully transplanting a young maize sprout into a corner plot. He pats the soil around it, steps back, and waits. The elder doesn't speak. He just nods. The boy grins like he's just passed a very serious test. Elsewhere, two teenagers argue, quietly, over the best way to prune a bean. One favors a curved blade. The other insists on a snapped stalk. They glance toward an older woman nearby, who merely raises an eyebrow. They try again. Trial, error, and a little bit of ego. Just like real life. And not all the lessons were about plants. Chinampas were also places where children learned responsibility, humility, and rhythm. You couldn't fake patience here. You couldn't skip ahead. If you watered wrong, the plant would tell on you in about a week. The garden had no favorites. Only observers. Only participants. You spot a boy carrying a gourd of water toward his family's plot. He stumbles. Nearly drops it, but regains his footing. No one else calls him. But an older woman calls out a proverb: water and children run where they are allowed. He grins sheepishly, bows, and tries again, this time slower. The chinampa drifts by like a living school. Its curriculum written in soil and sun. No bells. No desks, just life, growing, teaching. And maybe that's what stays with you most, that in this floating world of beans and blossom, the most important lessons aren't shouted. They're whispered, passed down with seeds, shaped with hands, and rooted deep. You float onward, a little smarter now, or at least, a little more curious. And the garden, ever patient, continues to teach in silence. The canal turns again, opening up into a wider expanse of water where sunlight glints off the ripples like scattered jade. You can feel it before you see it, the shift in energy. The quiet upete y seca in polish. In ornament. The chinampas here are not like the ones you've just passed. These are larger, cleaner, and in places, a little too perfect. You've entered the domain of royal gardens. Aztec emperors, nobles, and high-ranking priests didn't just rule cities, they cultivated image. And what better way to express power than through a garden that looked like it was drawn by the gods themselves? The first thing you notice is the layout. Still symmetrical, but grander, long straight paths lined with trimmed trees. Sometimes alternating colors: green, gold, green, Gold. Some of the trees are topiaries shaped like birds. Or flames. Or, for one particularly bold designer, a jaguar mid-leap. You pause to appreciate the confidence of someone who thought, let's shape this hedge like it's in mid-pounds. You pass beneath an arch formed by flowering vines trained carefully over a trellis. The flowers are all the same hue, a deep crimson, and they smell faintly of cinnamon and smoke. You're pretty sure no one in this section of the lake accidentally mixes their chili and marigolds. Everything here has intent, drama, budget. Aztec royalty used these chinampas as pleasure gardens, places to walk, host guests, or simply display an embarrassing abundance of flowers. It was a space for aesthetic flexing. Oh, this old thing? Just a rare orchid that only blooms under the full moon. One such plant, its xochitl, or obsidian flower, was famed for its dark purple hue and glossy, almost metallic petals, grown rarely and with great care. It was believed to attract the favor of the gods. Also, possibly bees with very expensive taste. You spot a gardener adjusting a pad of decorative stones, each one hand-painted with tiny glyphs. No muddy footpaths here. These stones have been scrubbed. Probably more than once. A nearby woman dusts petals of a lily with a feather. That's right. These are dust-free flowers. At the far end of one chinampa, a small platform rises above the garden. Not much, a low, carved stage of polished stone surrounded by baskets of incense and pots of orchids. This was where nobles would offer prayers, speeches, or poetry recitations. The Aztecs loved poetry. Some emperors were acclaimed poets themselves. Imagine a ruler who could conquer a city in the morning and compose a metaphor about hummingbirds by dinner. One emperor, Nezahualcóyotl, whose name roughly means hungry coyote, was both an engineer and a poet. He is credited with building dikes to protect the lake from flooding and for composing verses about the ephemerality of life and the scent of blooming flowers. In these royal gardens, his poems were sometimes recited aloud by appointed clamatini, philosopher poets. That's right, the court had official poets. Not Instagram poets. Full-time, robe-wearing, metaphysics-pondering sages. You drift past a chinampa where a series of plants has been arranged by color gradient. White flowers at one end, moving through pink, orange, and deep red. It's subtle, but striking. Someone spent time, a lot of time, on this palette. And the result is stunning. Your eyes slide down the row like you're reading a poem in petals. Then there's the water feature. You didn't think to skip that, did you? It's a narrow canal within a canal, a long, shallow ribbon of water carved through the center of the chinampa and lined with obsidian chips that shimmer in the light. Floating on it, lilies. Peaceful, precise. Over it, a simple wooden bridge. Probably more for show than function. You imagine nobles strolling over it slowly. Robes billowing. Sandals not daring to touch mud. Of course, these elite gardens weren't all for show. Many included experimental crops, rare herbs, imported plants from distant regions of the empire. The emperor's gardeners were botanists as much as artists. One document suggests that they attempted to cultivate cacao in slightly cooler climates, tending to it like it was a moody cat that needed extra sunlight and compliments. Here's a quirky little fact: some royal gardens were used to keep exotic animals. Not big ones, not jaguars here, but small, unusual birds, brightly colored insects, and frogs that made curious sounds. Not pets, not livestock, just fascinating things, like a floating cabinet of curiosities that chirped. You see one now, a golden bird with a blue neck hopping from reed to reed. It's tethered with a fine string of woven fiber, loose enough to let it move, but just tight enough to prevent escape. A young attendant nearby offers its slices of fruit from a clay dish. You're not sure whether this is love, science, or status symbolism. Likely, all three. Even the air smells different here. Scented smoke wafts from ceramic burners shaped like jaguars. The smoke is light, sweet, with a hint of spice, copal mixed with something floral. The burners aren't hidden. Tears spaced at intervals like garden lanterns, each one doubling as a subtle incense diffuser and, probably, a mosquito deterrent. Because even royalty is not immune to itchy ankles. Historians still debate the exact role of these royal gardens. Were they sacred spaces? Political stages? Living museums? Or perhaps all at once? One thing is clear, the emperors of the Mexica didn't just conquer land. They cultivated image. Their gardens were statements. Not loud ones, but unmistakably eloquent. You drift past a final stretch, where vines curl around carved pillars. A group of attendants in white cotton tunics quietly trim the edges of a pepper bed. Even their movements are graceful, like tear performing rather than working. It's peaceful, still, and just when you think it can't get more regal, a canoe rows by with its cargo hidden beneath a canopy of embroidered cloth. You catch a glimpse, pots of orchids, possibly bound for the palace, or a ceremony, or maybe just a noble's table centerpiece. You'll never know, but the message is clear. In a world ruled by gods, warriors, and calendars written in stone, the most powerful people still took time to grow flowers, to shape leaves, to walk slowly through a garden. Because even in an empire built on conquest, nothing says we made it quite like those free lilies and a symmetrical chili patch. The boat nudges away from the polished splendor of the royal gardens, drifting now into a livelier rhythm. The quiet hum of incense and feather dusting gives way to clinks of pottery, bursts of laughter, and the unmistakable aroma of something being grilled nearby. You're entering the festive zone. Here, the chinampas take on a different tone, not strictly practical, not strictly sacred, but celebratory. These were the gardens that came alive during festivals, harvests, and those wonderfully ambiguous, offerings to the wind, kind of days. If royal gardens were a performance, these were a party. The first thing you notice is the layout, open spaces between crops, as though the plants were politely making room for people. Flat areas of swept earth where mats have been unrolled, clay hoops clustered in shady corners, bundles of maize stalks propped like temporary altars. And in the middle of it all, people, children chase each other between bean poles. Elders sit cross-legged, braiding flower garlands. A group of women chat quietly while weaving palm leaves into trays, probably for carrying tamales. If the delicious smell is anything to go by, this isn't just a garden. It's a venue. You pass a chinampa where musicians, 3, maybe 4, tune instruments made of gore, reed, and stretched animal hide. The drumbeat is soft but steady, like the garden itself as a heartbeat. A flute joins in, shrill at first, then smooth, echoing across the water like a memory waking up. At the edge of one plot, a fire crackles gently beneath a clay comal, an Aztec griddle, where someone flips tortillas with a flat stick. You swear the scent is strong enough to make your stomach roll. Alongside, a bundle of squash blossoms sits waiting to be stuffed and fried. Even the food here is floral. Not far off, you see a long reed table set low to the ground. On it, a mosaic of food, roasted maize, steamed fish wrapped in leaves, chili sauces in little bowls, and piles of cuitlacoche, a fungus that grows on corn and was considered a delicacy. Not a disaster. Call it Aztec truffle, if you like. It's earthy, rich, and very controversial if you're not expecting it. And flowers, everywhere. Garlands draped over canoes. Necklaces made of marigold and white lilies. Loose petals scattered over mats. The Aztecs didn't just cook with flowers, they wore them, bathed in them, offered them to the gods. And sometimes, on especially poetic days, used them to communicate unspoken emotions. Here, he made you a garland of spicy love chilies and regret marigolds. Now comes a curious sight, a small reed platform floating beside the chinampa, holding a carefully arranged bouquet of maize, beans, flowers, and feathers. A priest, or perhaps a gardener acting as one for the day, lights a handful of copal and sends the smoke upward. It's an offering to Hecate, the wind god. Not a huge ceremony, no drums, no firestorms, just a whisper to the breeze, asking for balance. Historians still debate whether these offerings were scheduled or spontaneous. Were there assigned feast days? Did people just feel it in the air and think, you know what, let's honor the wind today? Either way, the practice was widespread, and always fragrant. One child carries a wreath of squash blossoms over to a canoe and lies it at the front, as though christening a ship. Perhaps it's a symbolic gesture. Perhaps I just thought it looked cool. Gardeners rarely needed a formal excuse to add beauty to function. You pass a chinampa that's been decorated with tall reeds bent into arches. Underneath, pots of bubbling atoli, a hot maize drink, are being stirred lazily with wooden spoons. This wasn't just for nutrition. Atoli was comfort, energy, warm, like the Aztec version of a cappuccino, but thicker and with fewer existential creases. You hear laughter now, raucous and honest, from a group playing a game near the canal's edge. It involves tossing small beanbags onto targets made from flattened gourd halves. You don't know the rules. Honestly, you suspect no one does. But it doesn't matter. There's joy, there's rhythm, and there's a bet being placed involving tamales. Every so often, a canoe arrives from deeper in the canal network, bearing more people, food, or decorations. One glides by, filled with nothing but flower petals and a musician playing a turtle shell like a drum. It doesn't make eye contact. Just floats past like a dream. There's a wonderful fringe theory that some chinampas were used exclusively for festival prep. Not for food, not for flowers, but for storing the tools of celebration, extra reed mats, painted masks, musical instruments, and bundles of fresh garlands. They were essentially floating party closets. You love that. And then, because every culture needs that one person, there's the guy who tries to juggle chili peppers and drops one in the canal. A child dives after it. Everyone cheers. And you're reminded again that even in an empire known for its fierce warriors and astronomical calculations, people still needed to laugh. The sun begins to angle toward the west. The garden glows a little warmer. Musicians shift to a slower tune. People gather closer to the food. And across the water, incense smoke curls like lacy ribbons of memory, blending with laughter, music, and the scent of roasted squash. One gardener raises a clay cup and pours a small stream into the soil before taking a sip. A toast for the earth. For the harvest. For the moment. You don't speak the language. But you understand the gesture. You could stay here forever. Because in this world, the garden isn't just a space to work or worship. It's a place to celebrate being alive. The festival sounds fade behind you now, guitars drifting into flute tones. Laughter giving way to the occasional splash of a paddle. Your canoe follows a winding canal into a less tended part of the lake, where the chinampas grow wilder, looser, as if sinking into old age. Here, the symmetry begins to falter. Plants still grow, but not in perfect rows. Some plots are half submerged, their borders softened by time and water. These are the forgotten gardens. The overgrown edges. The ones left behind as the empire's heartbeat slowed. You've entered the dusk of the chinampas. The part of the story where things don't quite break, but quietly fade. Tenochtitlan, once the pulsing capital of a mighty empire, did not follow Lat Once. It fractured, then crumbled. Spanish invaders came in waves, bringing horses, cannons, disease, and a taste for gold that no maize patch could satisfy. And slowly, the gardens began to die. It didn't happen overnight. In fact, at first, they were left alone. The Spaniards, confused and slightly dazzled by the chinampa system, let them continue for a while. Why mess with a floating salad bar that practically fed itself? But over time, as colonization tightened its grip, priorities shifted. The water levels dropped, dikes broke, canals clogged, imported livestock trampled fragile banks. Fields were seized, converted, drained, or simply abandoned, without the intricate daily care of generations of gardeners. The system began to dissolve. Not violently, just slowly, silently. Historians still argue whether it was the deliberate dismantling of a rival system or a byproduct of neglect. Some point to the draining of Lake Texcoco as a symbolic death knell. Others believe it was bureaucracy, colonial land deeds and crop quotas, that smothered the chinampa way of life more effectively than any sword. You float past a plot where wild grass has overtaken the maize. 11 symmetrical rows are buried beneath reeds. A half-buried stone idol watches from a crooked angle. Its face chipped, but still faintly smiling. And yet, there's a strange beauty here. These overgrown gardens don't feel defeated. Just changed. Transformed into something more feral. The willows still arch over the canals. The flowers still bloom, though no one harvests them. A turtle suns itself on the edge of an old planting mound, looking like the most peaceful ruin you've ever seen. There's a story that some gardeners stayed long after the fall, refusing to leave, planting anyway, not for the market or the state or the gods, but for memory. They sang the old chants, hummed to their maize, whispered to the wind. They knew the world had changed, but they weren't ready to let it forget how it used to breathe. You see the echo of that now. A single chinampa stands half-maintained, clear rows visible. If a bit crooked, someone still visits. The footprints are too fresh. A single canoe tied to a tree branch. A clay jug resting on a rock. A plot of quelites, wild greens, neatly picked. Somehow, in the collapse of empire, the rhythm of planting persisted. Like a heartbeat too quiet to hear unless you were really still. You pass a cluster of broken stakes. Once the corners of a proud chinampa. Now just bird perches. One heron stands with a regal indifference. Preening. A gardener would have smiled at that. Nature reclaiming nature. And not all was lost. Even after conquest, some parts of the chinampa system survived. In Xochimilco, now a borough of Mexico City, fragments of the network still function. Families still tend the plots. Crops still grow. Tourists float by on boats with names like La Bonita and El Jaguar. It's not the same, of course, but it's something. A bridge between past and present. Stitched together with maize roots and stubborn memory. There's even evidence that techniques from the chinampas influenced colonial era farming. Spanish priests, after all their sermons, eventually realized that floating gardens made more food than faith. And so, in hidden corners, the knowledge lived on, not in textbooks, but in hands, in the cayuses of great-grandchildren who never stopped digging in the mud. You take a deep breath. The air smells older here. Wetter, like a story buried beneath leaves. Here's a curious tidbit. Some believe that the layout of Mexico City still echoes the structure of Tenochtitlan's chinampas. A few streets follow the same paths as ancient canals. Certain neighborhoods sit on old garden beds. Even some building foundations rest atop woven mats of ancient reeds, now fossilized into the bones of the city. It's possible, just possible, that the city never truly replaced the gardens. It just grew over them. You reach the end of the canal. Ahead lies open water, broken only by the ghost shapes of chinampas beneath the surface. The sun dips lower now, light shimmering on patches of dockweed, casting long reflections of willow limbs. You think of the symmetry that once ruled this space. The perfect lines, the cardinal directions, the sacred order. It's gone, but not entirely. Because even in this faded form, the garden remembers. And so do you. You let the boat drift. There's no paddling now, no destination, just the quiet, the rhythm of water brushing against worn wooden sides. And the long, slow exhale of a lake remembering itself. Ahead, just barely visible through the soft haze of twilight, stands a lone chinampa. It's narrow, fringed with reeds, half its edges given into the water. But the center holds firm, like a stubborn page in a half-burned book. This is where we end our journey, not in the empire's grandeur or the poet's flourish. But here, in stillness, in a garden that refuses to vanish. You reach the edge and step softly onto the plot. The soil is cool underfoot, damp, as if it's waited all day for this moment of bare contact. The plants here are few. Some wild beans climbing a broken stake. A marigold blooming defiantly from a crack in the earth. A willow drooping like it's whispering something just for you. You wander slowly. No map, no path. Just a gentle sense of gravity pulling you inward. Toward the center of the chinampa. There, beneath the tree, a flat stone rests, half covered in moss. Smooth from generations of hands. You kneel. There's no fire, no ceremony. Just a deep hush. Like the garden knows night is coming and has chosen peace over protest. You look up. The lake is calm. So calm you can see the sky in it, a mirror dome of soft pastels. The last blush of sun folding into a pale blue dream. You hear a frog chirp once. Then stop. Even the insects seem to hold their breath. This place, once part of an empire's beating heart, is now a memory with roots. But you can feel it. Can't you? The rhythm is still here. The geometry beneath the grass. The invisible lines of symmetry tracing their way across the water. Straight, steady, patient, and somewhere in the reeds. Maybe, the ghosts of gardeners walk in silence. Checking their rows, whispering to their maize, leaving offerings not for gods, but for time itself. There's one last thing to notice before you leave, a single canoe. Tucked into the shadows of the far shore. Inside it, a bundle of tools. A gourd of water. A small basket of chili seeds. Someone's coming back tomorrow. And the garden will wait. Wind down, final 300 words. So now, we leave the chinampas behind. Let the lake close slowly over the sound of footsteps in the mud. Let the petals fall without fanfare. The marigold, the maize, the breath of the earth, till continue their quiet choreography. Long after you've gone, you lie back in the boat one last time. The air has cooled, just enough to raise a shiver. But it's not uncomfortable. It's the kind of cool that says, rest. You've wandered far. You've seen the sacred patterns of the Aztec world, not through conquests or pyramids, but through the lines of a garden. Through rows of squash, birdsong at dawn, and the silence that follows a day well tended. The stars begin to shimmer above. And in the water, they answer. The chinampas are fading into shadow now. But the rhythm stays with you. A pulse beneath your thoughts. A symmetry beneath your breath. Let it lull you. Let it hold you. Let the reeds bend. Let the insects hush. Let the stories fold themselves gently into your sleep. Tomorrow will come, and the gardens will wake again. But for now, rest. Drift. Dream of floating rose and flower there. And sleep as if the soil remembers your name. End of script. Sweet dreams.